Thank you all for joining this latest Urban Ag webinar. We have a series of webinars available on our website, which is on the screen. Please also visit that website for other resources and to visit our newsletter. If you want updates about upcoming webinars, those are best received by signing up for our newsletter. The URL to do that is on the screen, and I will share it again in the chat in a second. But for today, we're joined by Julia McGuire, a beekeeper and educator based in Des Moines. She will cover beekeeping strategies, including phenological planning and ecological thinking. Julia has received sustainable agriculture research and education grants to create new resources and host learning circles for beginning producers. This presentation is intended to be an introduction to beekeeping practices and resources, with special attention to urban agriculture scenarios. McGuire helps beekeepers gain confidence with basic skills and niche topics. Since inheriting her bees in 2011, Julia has kept bees in her backyard and other sites, created beelaws.org, the phenology calendar for beekeepers, founded her city's community garden, trained beekeepers in Jamaica and Honduras, and served on boards of her regional bee club and the Iowa Farmers Union. A Q&A session will follow the presentation. To use the Q&A feature, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Because chat is disabled for this webinar, you will only be able to submit questions. So at the end of the presentation, I will start reading questions to Julia that you guys have submitted, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. And with that being said, I will stop sharing my screen, and Julia, you may get started.
So hopefully everybody's in the right place. It's nice to have everyone here. Like Graham said, I've been involved with urban agriculture for quite a while, and I want everyone to take notice of this Farmer Rancher Grant number FNC 21-1289. If I say something and you want to go back and know more about it, please go to the SARE website and use the database to find this grant number. You'll see a lot more detail there. This is a picture of me with a mentor. I'm mentoring, and this is one of my mentees. And the main point I want to make here is that knowledge is really passed down by mentoring. And the reason that I started thinking about submitting a farmer rancher grant is because I noticed that my beekeeping students were not able to identify a maple tree. When I was talking about maple trees, they didn't know what I was talking about. And I think that's kind of common when you're a city kid, right? I didn't grow up in the city, but my children were raised in the city. So I do understand how that goes a lot of times. I also want to talk a lot about the Farmer Rancher Grant as being one of the best things ever, because it is a grant program that an individual farmer can apply to and be awarded funds. I want to say it's up to $15,000. And the funding for this program was just released. So I want to make sure that if you're interested, if you have a problem that you would like to solve, you're not quite sure how to get there without extra funding, this grant program is a great way to get that done. So cannot speak highly enough about it. So if you have more questions about that, you can always send me an email later. So let's talk about urban beekeeping resources for Iowa. And of course, being the good Iowan that I am, I thought I would pull this video up for you just to kind of set the scene. So the main point about Meredith Willson, if you know the Music Man, and you know this is based in Iowa, right? So let's think about this. Here you are, you want to keep bees, or you already have bees in your city. What do you actually know? It could go like this.
Yes,
The situation could be this way.
but he doesn't know the territory.
River City.
I want to talk a little bit about this because this situation actually happened, where sometimes people will start keeping bees and then the neighbor calls and turns them in, and it's not allowed. So 2 resources I want to share with you. The first is beecheck.org. And if you are already growing in an urban setting or not, you probably already know about the sensitive crops directory with IDOLs. There is a subsection inside there just for beehives. And so you can go in there, it's optional, it's voluntary to put your site in there. But I think it's helpful also from not only, hey, pesticide applicators, this is where my beehive is. I think it's also important to see where all the other beehives in your area might be located, how close they are. Think about sharing forage, etc. The other resource that I really want you to think about, again, because sometimes if you don't know, you don't know. So I created beelaws.org. It's about half updated. So if you are keeping bees in a city that begins with the letter P down through Z, I maybe haven't gotten to your city yet this year, but basically you can go to beelaws.org, click on the city. It's the 77 most populous cities in the state. And you just click on there and it has contact information, whether bees are allowed or not, under what conditions, etc. So, like I said, we don't want the train wreck to happen like happened in Music Man. We want to set you up very well. So, of course, the best way to keep bees is to have a mentor, to take a beekeeping class. This is a thing where you can see my daughter on the right, her mentor on the left. I know they're talking about things. I know that Jerry was telling my daughter things about when lightning bugs come out, that's when you do this and that. Did that ever get written down? Probably not. It maybe got written down on Jerry's little notepad that he sticks in his breast pocket, but it's just his little scribbles that only he can decode. So again, I knew that my students in beekeeping classes weren't recognizing maple trees. And so this is kind of where that one-on-one mentorship is very valuable. So I made a grant project up where we would keep track of phenology and correlate them to beekeeping chores. This is one example of phenology that most people are accustomed to. A lot of people have heard about these different kind of farmers' almanac kind of adages. And there are also beekeeping ones. I don't know if anyone's heard of any of these. These are all things that I've heard my beekeeping elders say during club meetings. And that's something that I wanted to help the newer beekeepers learn. So Graham had talked about my different apiaries. I thought I'd just show you a quick overview of how different all the different places look as far as forage goes. So here's a close-up of very urban, and you can kind of see it here. There's plenty of vegetables growing, but there's also a lot of mature trees. There's also a lot of concrete here. If we look here at Drake, okay, there's an awful lot of concrete, but I know that they have very well taken care of trees. There's also an awful lot of sod grass, right? If we go here, this is on the edge of an urban area, but there's also a lot of wild space, even though this isn't town, there's a lot of wild area that's got some different forage opportunities. And again, this is an orchard. Okay, the orchard's probably blooming for the whole month of May. What else is going on in the neighborhood outside of that? So, I can look, I see it's very residential. Is this an area where people have a lot of gardens in their front yard? What's the situation like? So these are things that you're going to want to think about as you place your beehives. And if you are in a rural situation, you will also want to kind of take a look around and see what's available. Again, both rural, very different bee yards. You can see, let me see, where's my cursor? So you can see I've got 4 beehives set up here. It was very early in the season when I did this. We've got some young trees. And then back here, a lot of acres of corner beans. All right, so things that you might want to think about, what's the impact all year round? What's going to be blooming? So if you don't know what's going on in that particular bee yard, you could be missing swarms. A swarm could occur. You could lose half your bees and you wouldn't even know it if it's not a bee yard that's like right where you live or work. There are many other things that are going on in the hive and in the environment that the bees are reacting to the different things out in the environment. So if there's a lot of pollen, the bees will bring that back, and that's how the cues for laying a lot of eggs come about. Like, oh, there's a lot of pollen. We could support a large workforce. So we're going to work with the pollen flow and with the nectar flow to help us manage our bees well. Now, in addition to abundance of pollen and nectar, sometimes we have drought, right? So a lot of times, right at the same time that white Dutch clover is drying up, which is a favorite food of bees, I believe that the clover and the honeybees evolved together over in Europe. Over here, the clover is all brown and dried up, but the butterfly milkweed is just starting to open, and it's pretty abundant if you have it there. So these are some things that I really encourage you to observe and learn, increase your identification skills, and think about how whatever is blooming, how does that correlate to what you see inside your hive? The other thing I really want you to think about is just accept that we have non-native trees and forbs, and we're just going to go with it, just work with it. It's not practical to replace all of that, but I do want you to think about everything outside in your bee yard as a whole. All right, so going back to my students don't know what a maple tree is. This is what I learned. Hopefully you can all relate to this. And I'm checking my time here. Okay. So I've got my planner, I've got my calendar. A lot of people helped me make this, and it's just a baseline for you. It's not a Bible. The things that I have listed here may not be blooming where you are. I will share that I went to my cousin's wedding for the 4th of July, and the catalpa trees were just opening up. Well, I had just been in southern Iowa, south central Iowa, and the catalpas were done by June 4th. So again, this is kind of a guideline, but it's not the end all be all. That's why I encourage you to take your own notes. It doesn't have to be in a fancy book like this. It could be like my daughter's mentor, Jerry. He just had that little spiral notebook. Maybe you're keeping track of your hive notes, and there's a spot on your sheet where you're tracking your hive observations, where you're also going to write down what's in bloom and if the bees are visiting it. So again, I'm going to say you'll probably have phenology notes for each bee yard that you have. I would say everything is very hyperlocal, even though we know bees fly far away, as you know, as far as they need to get a great nectar source. They're also at the same time not going to fly farther than they have to, right? Like I might be sitting on the couch and I'm comfortable watching television and it's nice, and I really don't feel like going to the refrigerator. I don't feel like going over to the kitchen, but if there's a bag of chips sitting on the ground, I will go get that, right? So bees are kind of the same way. I'm not saying they're lazy, but I'm saying they'll take the opportunity if it's closer. So pay attention to what's blooming when you're making your hive inspections. Also see if you can make notes for the plants that the bees actually visit. So why am I saying phenology? I'm saying phenology because the dates, the months, like I just gave you my example of going up to the Twin Cities for my cousin's wedding and looking at the catalpa trees. Just looking here in central Iowa where I live, you can see the big variations in the dates when dandelions were first spotted. So that's a very wide range of dates. The cool thing about phenology is that the order of events will always be the same. It doesn't matter what the date is, it doesn't matter when frost happened. If frost came earlier or later, you're still going to have the same order of events. So if you grab one of these calendars or if you start making your own notes, just know that what you're seeing, you might write down the date. Like I wrote down all the dates for those different dandelion blooms, the bud burst. Just know that's the order. The date itself might shift. And every bee yard's going to have a little variation, usually from each other. So the calendar that you're seeing here, if you grab this from me at an event, or if you already have one, maybe from one of the events I attended with you in the past, the information on the front and the back is the same. I'm really going to encourage you to join your local bee club, sit next to your beekeeping elders. I know they like talking with their old friends, but just I would really encourage you to go say hi, introduce yourself, and ask, what's going on in your hive right now. And then the other part is don't just look at forbs. It's not just flowers on the ground. There are also trees. Trees have an awful lot of surface area compared to the ground. So identification skills are something that everybody could really work on. I think that's why just making your notes is really difficult because it's not the same as identifying. There's so many different yellow flowers, for example. You've got to be able to know the different yellow flowers from each other. So this is an example here. Early pollen flow helps you maximize the workforce ahead of the first nectar flow. That knowledge right there will help you manage your colony for swarms or splits. If you do splits or if you sell splits, you can increase the number of hives without buying bees. And you can also start selling bees without having a big loss from your baseline number that you're trying to keep going. Keeping diverse forage is it's been shown many, many times in academia to encourage disease suppression. So when you're making your notes, either, like I said, in your little notebook in your pocket, alongside your hive observation notes, if you can see like, hey, I didn't see any flowers to write down for this visit, I would take note of that date. There's a gap in your forage that's available. So I would take advantage of that gap to plant something. Usually it's the early spring or the late fall where your bees are going hungry and there's nothing for them to eat. So that's why I've got this picture of asters and goldenrod. That's an area of opportunity. The other one, this picture down here on the bottom left, that's linden. So if you can identify linden, you can sell if you can work it out. Like black locust or acacia honey, that's another one. If you can work it out so that your bees can work that tree, because there's not a lot else blooming in the area, you could be harvesting some monocrop specialty honey. And again, that goes back to being able to observe and manage your hives in such a way to increase your economic opportunity. So if there's anything else that you might be thinking of, I would encourage you to go to the SARE website. So the North Central, the NCR SARE at ncrsare.org and look up this farmer rancher grant. I know there are questions in the release that included these 3 questions, and I can certainly answer those for you. But if you can see me in person, that would be even better. I will have a lot of these calendars for you. If you're interested, just come up and see me. I'll give them to you. You aren't going to be at either of these events, the honey producers or the Saturday of the Practical Farmers Conference. You can go to Etsy and buy one, either as a digital download or you can get a hard copy. I put my Instagram handle up there. If you follow me, I'll follow you back. If you need to get a hold of me, I think Graham's got my info. And then I would also encourage you to take the survey at the end of this webinar, either by link or with the QR code. If there are any questions, I think this would be a good time to take them. Do we have anything? Should I stop? Did I stop the share?
Yeah, you did. We have a couple questions already. First one
Perfect.
is straight up just what if my city is not listed on blaws.org?
If your city's not listed on blaws.org, then you can either call City Hall, or if you feel like that's putting too much of a target on your back, send me an email with that city and I will see what I can find. Like I said, it was 70 cents. So this would have been in 2015. The state apiaries and I picked out the most populated cities and went from there. And again, it's a thing where if you're an unincorporated, inside city limits, but in the unincorporated area, the laws probably don't even apply to you. So, yeah, if you feel like it's too risky for you to ask, I can certainly do the ask for you, and I'll add them to the website.
Yeah, it turns out they were asking about Burlington specifically.
Burlington's not on there, or they're not up to date. I'll check it out. Okay,
I have
I
another
got the note.
question. Um, Someone else asks, before starting beehives, how concerned should we be about honeybees competing with the native bee populations?
That's an excellent question. So that is really only an issue if they're battling for forage. If there's a lot of different forage available, that's not an issue. So a lot of bees that are native, they are adapted to pollinate only a small sector of the flowers that are available. So I would say if you look at, say like look at a catalpa tree, the way those flowers are formed, they're really not suited for something small like a honeybee. Um, the honeybee would have to chew through the back in order to get to the nectar. Same with like a common milkweed. They're really not suited for honeybees. The honeybees, well, maybe that's part of it. The strategy of the plant is to catch the honeybees' legs and those little slits that they have in their flowers, so the honeybee can't escape. So there's a lot of flowers that with the bigger or smaller bees are not well suited to visit. So again, if you have a lot of diverse forage available, it should not be an issue.
Okay. This question is kind of just getting at if you can, they asked, how does one get started with beekeeping? And that's kind of just a basic. I think they are meaning, what's the very first thing you should be thinking about or doing, before you're even thinking about starting. Obviously, you mentioned, evaluating the ecological landscape around you, scouting for potential spots to place a hive. And then would you recommend maybe a more specific about like how to find groups for beekeepers in your local region or how to maybe even shop for supplies?
Okay, so I like this question. There's a lot of different ways you can go about it. So I would start probably not until December. I would go to the Iowa Honey Producers Organization's website. So iowahoneyproducers.org. They've got a tab for clubs if you wanted to start joining club meetings in December or January, usually in December. They will publish a list of all the beginning beekeeping classes that occur. So beekeeping classes are usually held January, February, March. People don't usually think about bees until May, April or May, because they get spring fever, but classes are usually over by then. So that's what I would think about. Then for, like I say, clubs are mentioned on the, they're listed out pretty well on the Honey Producers website. And then I would say Facebook because they're real people and they will answer you for real. Yeah, I think it's mostly person to person. It's a very hands-on kind of activity.
All right. Um, we will wait for more questions, but in the meantime, I have one that I could ask, and that's about kind of marketing your honey.
Mhm.
Or how does one go about finding a market for the honey you produce?
So I think it depends on if you're currently selling or not. So if you're currently selling other products, it's typically an add-on. So some of the pictures of my hives that I showed you, um, for some of those, that landowner, I would wholesale to them, and then they would sell the full retail. Usually it's a word of mouth thing, and then there's usually more demand than you can produce. Um, yeah, I think it just depends on what your goals are. The same with like the value added products. It just really depends on what your goals are. But there's usually more demand than there is supply.
Okay, thank you. We did have a question come through. They are asking, I have a hummingbird feeder and the birds are gone. However, I have honeybees getting the nectar in it. I wonder if there's a better way for me to feed the bees alongside my flowers. I'm concerned because some bees are actually crawling in it and drowning in the nectar. And this person specified that they're not like caring for a hive necessarily. They just want to be bee friendly.
Right. So I would say take the feeder down, um, because we don't know where those bees are coming from, if they're your bees or not. That's just it. It's like community spread during COVID. We don't know where those bees are coming from. We don't know where they were before they went there. We don't know what viruses they're leaving behind when they leave. So I would say take it down if the birds are gone and they're not using it. I don't think there's any value there. And that's also a sign to me that there's not enough forage this time of year. So think about maybe planting asters or some goldenrod or something else that might bloom, this fall blooming crocus. Think about something that you might add to your yard to help the pollinators later in the year, like now.
Right. So as far as caring for bees, and like the garden setting, it's kind of just more planting more varieties and considering what plants you want to grow to be pollinator friendly.
Yes. Yep, exactly. So again, I think it kind of goes back to, I'm looking through my notes here and I see August, I have sunflower, partridge pea, goldenrod, aster, chicory, smartweed. Um, if you live in a place where there's a lot of sunflowers, maybe you've added sunflowers in here, compass plant, cup plant, which ones are the bees actually visiting? I think is kind of the thing you want to think about. So
Okay.
again, we're just making our notes and looking for those gaps, holes where there's nothing blooming.
Yeah. Um, One person asks if you could go through just some of the common phrases you were mentioning before that you hear from,
Oh, yeah,
some
let
veteran
me,
beekeepers, like rotate hives when blank or add a super when
yep,
blank.
yep.
Like just kind of walk through a few of those.
How about I share that with everyone here? Let me share my screen. Okay, so reverse your boxes when usually happens when you see dandelions in the spring, the first dandelions, you're going to reverse your boxes. In the winter, typically the bees start in the bottom box and they end up in the top box. And you know that enough time has passed and there's enough forage for the bees to manage when you reverse the boxes. So the bees are on the bottom and then it's empty up on top. So that's one of the signs. Dandelions blooming. Add supers when. So we're adding supers because we're taking advantage of that surplus honey that the bees suck away. So this is kind of depending on where you live. So the picture here is yellow sweet clover. Um, white sweet clover and yellow sweet clover emerge roughly the same time, but one usually comes before the other. So whichever one, depending where you live. the first one to emerge, white or yellow, that's when you're going to add a super. And then when whichever one, yellow or white, whichever one comes second, that's when you stop adding supers. You're really not going to get more surplus to harvest. And then blank is a good bee tree. I think that depends on where you live. But a lot of times it's a willow tree. Because there's nothing else. Maples and willows are just kind of fun, but willows in particular, because they're lower to the ground and you can see them. And there's usually nothing else in flower at the time. And willows are kind of funny because they flower before they leaf out. So that's an example of another very early spring flower that you could take advantage of. And they really don't even look like flowers.
Thank you for elaborating on those phrases. During your response, we had someone ask, will Julia's calendar be available to us after the webinar? If not, can we find it online or order it? I will make it available on the ISU Urban Ag website. I think it might be on there already, but also it is available from the SARE website. I will post the overall project link is in the chat right now to the overall SARE project, but I'll share the individual links to those resources. The book or the phenology planner and the beekeeper's calendar are both in the chat right now.
Yeah, and then like I said, I don't know if anyone's a part of the Farmers Union, I will be at the National Farmers Union Women's Convention, the 8th, 9th, 10th of November. If you see me, I will have some of those. These ones we ran out of very quickly, but if you see me at the other events, I will have one of the calendars. That I could give you a stack of those if you have a bee club or a garden club. So the links will have digital downloads. If you went to Etsy, you could buy the hard copy. So they are 11 by 17. I don't know if that's a common paper size, but we just couldn't smash it all in and still be able to read it on a regular piece of paper.
Yeah, good to know. So those are, yeah, available at the links in the chat.
Perfect.
I had another question come through. This person is asking, we are facing very harsh impact of climate change in Pakistan. Erratic rain, heat waves, and long dry spells. Honey production is reduced to almost half in some productive areas in this autumn season. One should be guided about pros and cons. How much of this business is dependent on climate patterns?
Yeah, it's an awful lot. And that's why I'm saying phenology instead of calendar dates, because that date of first frost is going to change. I read that we're having 8 more days of summer temperatures than what we did back when I was growing up. So, what was the question?
They're asking, just kind of maybe to elaborate on, yeah, how dependent climate is, or how dependent you are as a beekeeper on climate, and as you said, very dependent.
Yeah, it's just like any other farm, right? It's weather dependent and it's a big gamble. So I will say in Iowa, most people are saying that they did not have a harvest of surplus. So they would have to go back on whatever surplus they had from prior years. We'll get the full state of the state at the Honey Producers Conference at the end of this month.
Is that is saving surplus honey like a pretty standard strategy? Like, is it more viable to save some back rather than try to sell all of your productive?
Um, yeah, I think it depends on what scale you operate at. Yeah, I think you just have to look at your goals. If you're looking at that sustainable income all year round. If you harvest the varietal honeys, like I was talking about the acacia honey, the linden honey, or I'm trying to think of some of the others, like apple tree honey. If you're harvesting those are going to come really early in the year. They do take a lot of extra work to have monocrop honey. So if you're doing like most people do, and you've got like a generic wildflower honey, that's going to be something that you harvest in August and you're done. That's all you, what you get. That's all you have for the next 12 months. So I think it depends on your strategy. And also, you know, what scale are you operating at? I talked a lot to my students about what are their goals. Whatever their goals are will inform what their practice is and how they make decisions. So we are very weather dependent. And I do know some people, if they get pre-orders for certain events like Valentine's Day, that might be a time when you're sharing, you know, honey for your sweets or honey for your honey. They might set aside a certain amount in August that they save for February. But I would say that that's kind of rare. Most people take advantage of whatever sale they can get when they can get it. If they run out, they run out.
Yeah. On that note, um, I was just wondering if people probably wonder if they're just starting out, where they might need to get any sort of certification or approval to sell. Like, say they want to go to a farmer's market, are they required to do any sort of get any sort of approval, or is it kind of covered by?
You will need to have a certified scale. So as long as you've got a certified scale, we're not processing. We're taking honey, you know, straight from the hive into a bottle. So there's no processing. Um, if it's just straight honey, you don't have to really do anything. Just use that certified scale. And if you're already growing, you probably got one. If not, you can buy one for under $200, and I want to say it's $9 for the year to have it certified for a year or two.
Okay, thank you. One question came through asking, what are people experiencing for survival of the colonies now with colony collapse and other disorders? So kind of getting your take on colony collapse in the current.
So colony collapse disorder has been pretty rare in the more recent years. The thing that we're mostly battling is the varroa mite. And then the thing that's on the horizon is the tropholaylaps mite or the tropy mite. So the answer to this question depends on if you're a migratory beekeeper or not. So again, we're going back to your scale. If you're sending bees off to California, Alabama, you know, if you're sending them down to Texas, and then because they have earlier growing seasons, and then your bees are working their way back to Iowa, and they don't make it back to Iowa until May or June. Those colonies will definitely have, you know, the community spread issues that the hummingbird feeder has, like we were talking about earlier. If you are small and you're just keeping things at home and you've got 4 hives or less, you're probably, I would say you're not going to experience a lot of issues that you can't handle. It's when it's, you know, the larger scale, you know, 45 hives and up that I think is really where big monetary effects, especially if it's your livelihood, where those really come into play regarding, yeah, the trophy mite, the varroa mite, or colony collapse. And that would be a question, you know, if you wanted to, we could certainly go see the state apiarist, and, you know, he keeps statistics on all that.
So on the topic of scale, I just had a question that popped into my mind. How viable is it to kind of, or what decisions should people make if they want to have more of like a hands-off approach? Like if they do want to have a hive somewhere that's not like at their home property or at some place of work, that they can kind of check. How infrequently can they check it, I guess, or what can the time commitment be from
Yeah,
like a minimum or a maximum standpoint?
sure. And it's going to be seasonal. This is something that I discussed with all of my beekeeping students, beekeeping 101. So whether it's in your backyard or not, during the main flow seasons, May, June, July, August, a little bit of September, you're probably going to look at them every 7 to 10 days. There might be times in there where you're visiting for 3 days straight. Just kind of depends on what you're doing. In the winter and in the colder months, you're just going to go see your bees when you can, when the weather allows it, when you get access. So bees are kind of interesting in the winter. They will not go to the bathroom in their hive. They have got to go out of their hive and take a cleansing flight. They will just not go inside their hive. So you'll want to go, if we have a lot of snow where you live, you're going to clear the entrances so the bees can get in and out of the hive so they can get out and make their cleansing flight. Otherwise they'll be impacted and they'll die. So you want to keep a pulse on that when the weather's not the greatest. We know they're not going to go out flying and foraging. But you do want to see, do they have enough food left in their hive? And are they able to get in and out? Is that the entrance cleared for them?
Thank you. Another question about, because I think a lot of people from an urban agriculture standpoint are concerned about, economics and profitability, at least starting out. Because it's a risky, any sort of urban agriculture, when you're starting out can be seen as a really risky investment of time and money. How risky do you see beekeeping as like just an overall, if you were to invest like a general amount of money and time to just start out, how well do you think you'd return on that investment in, say, a year or two?
Okay, so again, I think it goes back to your goals. So if you are already growing, I guess I'll start out by saying I had maybe 4 years before we got bees, 4 years with strawberries lining the driveway of my suburban house. And I would have this many strawberries every year. When we got bees, since that time, it's been a quart every other day. So you have to consider the pollination effects in addition to selling honey or selling bees. So the best practice to your question is to have 2 colonies, 2 hives. So $300 is the basic woodenware. But once you add bees and then you add that second colony with the second set of boxes, you're probably looking at $1,000 for the year. And I will say, if you're doing things right, that $1,000 will probably last you indefinitely because none of those things wear out and your bees will always be replenished by the next generation that's born. That's one of the identifiers of a social insect. There's always new babies and new adults all the time. There's not just like a cow, like they just drop one and then you're done for the year. They're continually having to, so it's an investment. And if you can work on that continual education, you might have to have some money for chemical treatments or feed later on, but the things that you buy that first year will last you. That woodenware will last you. The bees, unless they die, should last you.
Thank you. So we had a follow-up from the participant from Pakistan. They're saying commercial beekeeping is facing threat from disorders and climate change, low pollen and nectar flow, increased inputs and low output. Please suggest short, medium, and long-term solutions to this problem, or I guess ways to adapt. And because we are to live with climate change and disorder problems, they're saying, it's kind of a fact of their environment now.
Yeah, well, I would say that's probably true almost everywhere. So I guess if you wanted to, I would think about decreasing the output. And again, it goes back to, I just took really good notes and I know where my forage gaps are, and I am going to start planting now so that I have something blooming in that window where there is no food. Now some things you can't control. We can't control how many growing days and how much rainfall we have. That directly impacts the pollen and nectar flows, and we can't control that. But by having diverse forage available, that's a way to combat the weather effects by having more options for the bees for their forage. So I think it's going to be surveying your landscape for different bee yards. Where's the best, most ideal habitat that's still going to give the bees access to water, and 5 different things are blooming at any given day. For increased inputs, I'm also thinking about different management practices. I know if you're in looking at the bees and actively managing with those environmental cues, that will so it's your labor is the input. It's not chemical input. It's your labor. I say that's probably the best solution ever, is to just be on top and know what they're doing. Hopefully
Thank
that
you.
answers. Hopefully you don't have despair. Hopefully that gives you some kind of hope.
Yeah, we're currently caught up on questions. So anyone who wants to ask, we've still got 10, 15 minutes of time for
Yeah, well, I
Julia
guess
to
I'm
answer.
I'm curious, how many people here do not have bees and how many do have bees? I guess that's what I'm really curious about.
Yeah, and that's also if everyone out, on that note, I'll drop a link to the survey because that is a
Yeah.
question of the survey. If everyone who's joined, please indicate whether you are a producer or if you're just curious. Hold on, I need to get that link fixed.
And then here, I can also put up the QR code probably here.
Yeah. So yeah, if everyone just wants to take a moment to at least open the survey, you can complete it later. Um, this will indicate, help Julia kind of assess how many of you are producers. We had a few people respond with some questions in the meantime. Someone said, do you provide supplemental feed to your bees like sugar water or pollen patties? How often or when do you provide the supplemental feed?
Okay, that's an excellent question. And I would say if I know the bees are not going to be able to get out of their hives to go forage because we're going to have 5 days of rain, yes, I will do that. If I know we're going to have 5 days of rain and the bees are going to have nothing inside their hive to eat, or they'll eat everything that's already laid up inside the hive, I will do that. For winter, if you're asking about supplemental feeding in the winter, I think it just depends. I teach my winter beekeeping students to aim for 100 pounds of honey. If I'm not feeling or weighing 100 pounds of honey, going like right now, I would definitely be feeding sugar syrup 2 to 1. If we've had a late frost, I know that happened in the recent past. I don't know if anyone else remembers that. We had like, no apples that one year. That was another example of a time when I would feed probably 1 to 1 sugar syrup. Feeding pollen is it's kind of a nuanced thing, and it goes back to what are your goals, what time of year is it? There's definitely some risks. You want to be able to have enough workforce to tend to the brood that you are encouraging them to lay. When you give them pollen, that's the signal to the queen to lay eggs. If there's pollen that you're giving them, but there's no food for them out in the world, and those babies emerge as adults, how are you going to keep all of them fed? Well, then you've made yourself a problem, and then you're going to be supplemental feeding. And I don't know what the prices of sugars are going to be, or whatever you're feeding them. So pollen, you got to be a little judicious with that.
Thanks.
That's a really good question, and I think that's why you have a mentor.
Yeah, exactly. Another question came through asking just generally, what is the best way to overwinter bees in northern Iowa?
Okay, so there's 2 ways to think about it. I don't know which way you think about it. I will be objective and tell you can either believe in having a condensing hive. Oh, see, my lights turn off. Having a condensing hive, and you're going to heat everything up. Or you're going to go with the ventilated hive, and you're going to kind of keep things open. So I think it's up to you how you do it. I personally believe in having a condensing hive. So I seal everything up. I actually have polystyrene hives, but you can use corrugated black plastic. You can use Be Cozy quilt wraps. I mean, you can't find things for pink and black. You can't find a ready-made box. You can make your own box. You can buy Tide Hugger. That's a commercial product. Um, I'll put an installation of foam board inside my cover covers. It's something that we definitely get very detailed about in my beekeeping class. So again, I really think person to person, is a continual thing. Like we'll never know everything there is to know about beekeeping. So we always have to keep in touch with everyone to stay up to date.
On that note, what is your advice for someone who wants to like be more just in touch with the latest developments in beekeeping, technology, research, whatever I might have you?
Sure. So I would say the easiest way would be to subscribe to a trade magazine. So we generally have two trade magazines. Um, there's the American Bee Journal, and there's also Bee Culture. And the other things that you have to kind of take them with a grain of salt because they are magazines that are produced by beekeeping suppliers. But they are very in tune with the academics and like the extension kind of people. Um, I would say those are probably the two best ways because they've been vetted. They've got editorial staff. Um, but if you're wanting to know more about Iowa itself, we did just lose our extension beekeeper. So we don't really have a substitute for that. So you probably want to get with your local bee club. A lot of the bee clubs have discussion groups on Facebook that you can join. Um, I'm not sure what else, like, I've got a monthly beekeeping email, but it's not really focused on that sort of thing. So yeah, I would say the two trade magazines. Bee clubs generally will have people who read the magazines and then they'll bring up that topic. Because our beekeeping clubs here they don't really contribute to that kind of discussion.
Got it. Um, you mentioned your website. Do you want to just share your screen and show a little tour of your website and what's available?
I maybe could do that. Let me see. I gotta find my website here. So this is what it looks like. Um, you can scroll down. I've got a lot of freebies. So when I was talking about making hive observations, let me show you that. I guess that's what I think would be really helpful. If you see here on the right, this hive inspection sheet. So that to me is a very valuable tool that I will go back and refer to. I'll make notes from my hive inspection, and then before I go out the following week, I'll go back and see what I observed, what I need to pack up, or what kind of supplies I need to find in between inspections. And then I've also got some fun quizzes. I think we should also maybe go to bee laws. That might be a good one. Oh, Burlington's right there. Okay, so Burlington has ghosted me, but that's the last, that's what we got right now. And we can check other cities. A lot of them I already know they are, because I've talked to people. Ames is pretty up to date. Johnson just had an update, I want to say last year, to their laws. It's pretty interesting. Everybody kind of approaches beekeeping differently. Some people consider it agriculture, some people consider it a nuisance, some people consider beekeeping its own separate thing. So it's really interesting to see how different cities approach it.
Yeah, and that is one thing I will say just to kind of tie it into the Iowa State Urban Ag project. Um, zoning and regulation of urban ag at the local municipal scale in general is like a huge challenge and a huge area of need for urban ag producers, people who are just starting out, wondering what's allowed and what's not. And
Mhm.
I will say that we're currently in the works of developing, a singular printed resource publication, um, kind of all about interpreting your city's municipal code, any other relevant ag laws
Yeah,
at the city scale.
yeah, and it's interesting, when I was doing this research back in 2015, the majority of cities had no law. So they interpret that to be, well, you're not breaking any law because there is no law. So it's allowed because it's not allowed, or it's allowed because we don't have anything. But then there was like 30% of the cities were like, well, we don't have anything, therefore it's not allowed. Even though it's the same, if both cities have nothing, 70% were saying, whatever you want. And the 30% were like, no way, unless it's expressly written, then you can't be doing it. So it's interesting to see how that's interpreted. And again, like the planners in my city, they came up with a model ordinance for me. I was like, how about instead of looking at a southern state, we look at a northern state? They've just got different issues than Iowa has. So it's just we just have to help them along.
Yeah. And we're getting there. I think, as you said, cities are rapidly kind of reevaluating their zoning ordinances and writing parts for urban ag that not nec were necessarily not covered or very loosely covered.
Right. The other thing you also want to think about, depending on what are your goals or your question about markets, is this a home occupation? Is this a home-based business? That's the other thing. Is a home-based business where you're operating out in the backyard, and all the zoning laws are written for in your house. Not so. Again, there's just make sure you're really friendly with all your neighbors. Give them all a pound of honey. Um, give them all a pack of whatever pollinator flower is. Like, just try to be really positive. Um, and again, whatever you can do at the local level with your government, I would say, people don't people want to be more forward thinking than conservative for this kind of thing. I think that's something that COVID helped us learn. So anyway, yeah, your mileage money good.
All right. And with that, I think we'll wrap up the webinar. It was a great discussion. Thank you all for coming. I'll just remind everybody, check the chat for a link to the webinar's evaluation. There's also going to be another link in a follow-up email to everyone who signed up with the link to the survey. Also, I'm linking Julia's website that has all the resources that she just showed us. The Iowa State Urban Ag website will soon have a recording of this webinar at the webinar's page. So if you missed anything or if you want to start back at the beginning, that'll soon be posted by the end of today. And please check back often for future webinars and stay subscribed to the newsletter to get the latest updates. All right. Thank you, Julia.
Excellent.